They were the living mountains of the Mesozoic era. Creatures of such profound and almost incomprehensible scale that they seemed to defy the very laws of biology. The sauropod dinosaurs, the long-necked giants like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, the colossal titanosaur, Argentinosaurus, were the largest land animals to ever walk the earth. An adult Argentinosaurus, a true giant among giants, could stretch over 100 feet in length and weigh 80 to 90 tons. It's the equivalent of a dozen large elephants combined into a single living organism. For over a century, the sheer, overwhelming size of these animals has been their defining characteristic, the central fact of their existence. But there is a deeper, more staggering mystery hidden within their colossal bones. It is not just that they got so big. It is that they got so big, so incredibly fast. The journey of a sauropod from a tiny, vulnerable hatchling to a titanic, ecosystem-dominating adult represents the most extreme growth spurt in the history of terrestrial life. This is the story of that impossible journey. It is the story of a biological paradox, a puzzle that has challenged paleontologists for decades. How did the sauropods build their mountain-sized bodies at a pace that seems to violate the rules of nature? To grasp the true scale of this challenge, we must begin at the beginning. A giant titanosaur like Argentinosaurus did not spring into the world as a multi-ton behemoth. It began its life, as all dinosaurs did, inside an egg. Fossil evidence from sauropod nesting grounds around the world, from Patagonia to India, shows that their eggs were typically spherical and surprisingly small relative to the adult's size, usually no larger than a modern cantaloupe or a soccer ball. From these modest eggs hatched a sauropod baby, a sauropodlet that was, by the standards of its parents, minuscule. A hatchling Argentinosaurus would have weighed perhaps 10 to 15 pounds, about the size of a goose or a small turkey. This is the central paradox. An animal that starts its life at 15 pounds must, over the course of its life, reach a weight of 90 tons, or 180,000 pounds. This is an increase in body mass of over 12,000 times. To put that in perspective, a human baby that grows at a similar rate would end up weighing more than the Brooklyn Bridge. This is not just growth. It is an explosion of biological creation, a relentless, lifelong sprint from the size of a bird to the size of a building. How do we know how fast they grew? The answer, remarkably, is written into the very fabric of their bones. The science of paleohistology involves cutting incredibly thin, translucent slices from fossilized dinosaur bones and examining them under a microscope. What this reveals is that dinosaur bones, much like the trunks of trees, preserve a record of their growth in the form of annual growth rings. These rings, properly called lines of arrested growth or lags, represent a period each year when the animal's growth slowed down, likely in response to a dry or less productive season. By counting these rings, paleontologists can determine the age of a dinosaur at the time of its death with a high degree of accuracy. By measuring the size of the bone at each ring, they can then plot a growth curve for that individual, tracking its increase in size year by year. When scientists did this for a wide range of sauropod species, the results were astonishing. The studies revealed that sauropods achieved their colossal size in a remarkably short amount of time. They did not grow slowly and steadily for a century. Instead, they underwent a prolonged, explosive adolescent growth spurt that lasted for several decades. During this peak growth phase, a medium-sized sauropod like an Apatosaurus could pack on an incredible 5 to 6 tons every single year. That's the equivalent of gaining the weight of an entire adult African elephant every year for more than a decade. The largest titanosaurs were likely growing even faster. A young Argentinosaurus may have been gaining an astonishing 25 to 30 pounds every single day. This incredible growth rate was not a biological luxury. It was a survival strategy. In a world patrolled by giant theropod predators like Allosaurus and Giganotosaurus, a small young sauropod was an easy meal. Its only effective defense was to grow. Size was its shield, its fortress. The faster a sauropod could grow, the faster it could escape this predator trap and reach a size where it was effectively immune to attack. Their entire life was a race to become too big to be eaten. But this solution presents an even deeper biological problem. Such explosive growth is metabolically expensive. It requires a constant massive supply of energy and raw materials. It requires an internal and metabolism, a respiratory system, and a digestive system that can operate at an intensity that seems impossible for such a large animal. How did they fuel this biological furnace? How did they convert vast quantities of simple plant matter into tons of new bone, muscle, and tissue every year? And how did they do it without cooking themselves from the inside out, from the sheer metabolic heat they must have generated? These are the questions at the heart of the sauropod mystery. The answer is not a single, simple trick. It is a suite of interconnected, perfectly integrated, and utterly brilliant evolutionary innovations. To understand how they grew so big, so fast, we must dissect the sauropod and look at it not as a slow, lumbering reptile, but as one of the most efficient and sophisticated biological machines that has ever existed. The investigation begins with the very engine that powered this impossible growth, its metabolism, and its revolutionary breathing apparatus. To fuel a growth rate that involved gaining the mass of an elephant every year, a sauropod required an internal engine of immense power and unprecedented efficiency. It needed a metabolism that could run hot, processing vast quantities of food and converting it into new tissue at a blistering pace. For decades, this presented a major problem for paleontologists. The traditional view of dinosaurs as cold-blooded, reptilian creatures simply could not account for this level of biological activity. A cold-blooded ectothermic animal, like a modern crocodile or lizard, has a slow metabolism. It relies on external sources of heat, like the sun, to regulate its body temperature. This is an energy-efficient way to live, but it comes at the cost of sustained activity and rapid growth. No purely cold-blooded animal could have possibly fueled a sauropod's explosive growth spurt. This led to the inescapable conclusion that sauropods must have been, to some degree, warm-blooded endothermic. Like modern birds and mammals, they must have generated their own internal heat, maintaining a high and stable body temperature that allowed their cellular machinery to operate at peak efficiency 24 hours a day. The evidence for this is not just theoretical, it's also found in the microscopic structure of their bones. The thin sections of sauropod bone examined by paleohistologists show a type of bone tissue called fibrillamellar bone. This is a highly vascularized, rapidly deposited type of bone, riddled with channels for blood vessels. It is the signature of fast-growing, warm-blooded animals. The bones of modern cold-blooded reptiles, by contrast, show a different, more slowly deposited structure with far fewer blood vessels. The bones themselves tell us that the sauropod engine ran hot, but being warm-blooded at such a colossal size presents its own seemingly insurmountable problem: overheating. An animal's volume, and thus its heat-producing capacity, increases as a cube of its length, while its surface area, its heat-dissipating capacity, increases only as a square. This is the principle of gigantothermy. A multi-ton sauropod, with its massive heat-generating torso and relatively small surface area, would have faced a constant critical danger of cooking itself from the inside out. How did it solve this thermal paradox? Could it maintain a high-performance warm-blooded metabolism without suffering from lethal heat stroke? The answer, remarkably, lies in its respiratory system. The key clue comes from a feature that sauropods share with their distant living relatives, the birds: a system of pneumaticity. The fossilized vertebrae of sauropods are not solid bone. They are hollowed out, filled with a complex, honeycomb-like network of air sacs and empty spaces. For a long time, this was thought to be a simple weight-saving measure, a way to lighten their colossal skeletons. While it certainly did that, its primary purpose was likely far more sophisticated. These air sacs were not isolated pockets. They were part of a vast, integrated, and highly efficient respiratory system that was fundamentally different from our own. Like modern birds, sauropods almost certainly possessed a one-way or unidirectional flow-through respiratory system. In our own mammalian lungs, air flows in and out in a simple tidal fashion. We breathe in, the air goes into tiny sacs called alveoli. Gas exchange occurs, and we breathe out the stale air. It's an inefficient system because the fresh, oxygen-rich air is always mixing with the old, oxygen-depleted air. A bird's respiratory system is a masterpiece of efficiency. It involves a set of small, rigid lungs that are connected to a series of large air sacs, distributed throughout the body cavity and even into the hollow bones. Air flows in a continuous one-way loop through this system. The first inhalation fills the posterior air sacs. The first exhalation moves that fresh air into the lungs. The second inhalation fills the anterior air sacs with the now stale air from the lungs. While simultaneously drawing a new batch of fresh air into the posterior sacs, the second exhalation expels the stale air from the anterior sacs. The result of this complex two-breath cycle is that the lungs are constantly bathed in a stream of fresh, highly oxygenated air. There's no mixing of old and new air. This allows birds to extract far more oxygen from every breath than a mammal can, which is one of the reasons they can perform the metabolically demanding feat of flight. Even at high altitudes where oxygen is scarce, sauropods almost certainly had this same revolutionary breathing apparatus. The pneumatic bones are the smoking gun. This bird-like respiratory system would have provided their bodies with a supercharged supply of oxygen, the fuel needed to power their high-octane, warm-blooded metabolism and their incredible growth rate. But this system did more than just supply oxygen. It was also a sophisticated whole-body cooling system. The vast network of air sacs extending throughout the torso and deep into the neck and tail vertebrae would have acted like a giant set of internal bellows. With every breath, the sauropod would have been circulating a huge volume of relatively cool, inhaled air throughout its body core. This air would have absorbed the immense metabolic heat generated by its tissues and then been expelled during exhalation. It was, in essence, a form of whole-body air conditioning. This brilliant dual-purpose system allowed the sauropod to have the best of both worlds. It could maintain the high, stable body temperature needed for rapid growth, while simultaneously using its own breath to prevent the catastrophic overheating that its giant size would have otherwise guaranteed. With the engine now understood a warm-blooded metabolism supercharged by a hyper-efficient, bird-like respiratory system that also doubled as an internal cooling mechanism, we can turn to the next part of the puzzle, the fuel. To grow at such a phenomenal rate, a sauropod needed to consume and process an unimaginable quantity of food every single day. Its digestive system had to be a non-stop, high-throughput processing plant for converting tough, fibrous plant matter into the raw materials for building a giant. The next stage of our investigation takes us from the lungs to the gut, to explore the secrets of the sauropod's incredible eating machine. A supercharged, warm-blooded metabolism and a hyper-efficient respiratory system formed the powerful engine of sauropod growth. But an engine, no matter how powerful, is useless without fuel. For a sauropod, the fuel was plants, and the challenge was to consume and process a truly staggering quantity of this low-energy, fibrous food source every single day. A growing subadult sauropod, packing on thousands of pounds a year, would have needed to operate its digestive system not as a simple stomach, but as a vast, continuous flow industrial-scale fermentation factory. The innovations that allowed for this incredible feat of herbivory began at the very front end of the animal, its head and neck. One of the most defining features of a sauropod is its incredibly long neck, which in some species, like Mamenchisaurus, could reach a length of nearly 50 feet longer than a school bus. For decades, this neck was a source of great debate. Early reconstructions depicted sauropods as aquatic creatures, living in swamps and using their long necks like snorkels. Later, they were imagined as terrestrial giraffes, holding their necks high to browse on the tops of tall trees. Modern biomechanical analysis, however, has shown that holding such a colossal neck vertically would have required an impossibly powerful heart and an astronomical amount of energy to pump blood all the way to the head. The more likely posture for most sauropods was a neck held more or less horizontally. This did not mean they were limited to eating off the ground. Instead, the neck was a vast, sweeping feeding apparatus, a biological conveyor belt that allowed the animal to be a remarkably efficient, low-energy browser. Imagine an 80-ton Argentinosaurus. Moving such a colossal body takes an immense amount of energy. Instead of constantly taking a few steps to reach a new patch of ferns or cycads, the sauropod could simply stand in one spot and, with a gentle, sweeping motion of its long neck, graze on a huge arc of vegetation around its body. It could clear out an entire grove without taking a single, energy-intensive step. The long neck was a masterpiece of energy conservation, allowing the sauropod to maximize its food intake while minimizing its energy expenditure. The head at the end of this neck was another key to its efficiency. Sauropod heads were, in comparison to their enormous bodies, incredibly small and lightweight. This was a crucial adaptation. A large, heavy, muscular head at the end of such a long neck would have been an energetic and structural nightmare to support. The design of the head reveals the sauropod's feeding strategy. It was not built for chewing. Unlike the herbivorous hadrosaurs, or ceratopsians, which had complex dental batteries and powerful jaw muscles for grinding and pulverizing tough plant matter. Sauropod skulls were delicate structures with simple, peg-like or chisel-shaped teeth. Their jaws were weak. They did not chew their food. Instead, they used their teeth like rakes or shears, stripping huge quantities of leaves, ferns, and branches from the vegetation and swallowing them whole. This was another brilliant time, an energy-saving innovation. Chewing is a slow, laborious process. By eliminating it entirely, the sauropod could dramatically increase its food intake rate. It was a bulk feeder, a living harvester that prioritized getting as much plant matter into its body as quickly as possible. But this strategy, swallowing vast amounts of unchewed fibrous plant material, creates an obvious problem: digestion. How did they break down this tough food without chewing it first? The answer lay further down the digestive tract, in their enormous, barrel-chested torsos. The sauropod gut was a colossal fermentation vat. Like modern herbivorous mammals such as cows and elephants, sauropods relied on a vast internal ecosystem of symbiotic bacteria and microbes to break down the tough cellulose in the plant matter they consumed. This giant microbe-filled gut would have acted as a slow-moving, highly efficient chemical reactor. The unchewed plant matter would enter this vat and remain there for a long time, a concept known as gut residence time. This long residence time gave the microbes ample opportunity to ferment the material, breaking it down and releasing a steady, continuous stream of energy-rich fatty acids that the sauropod could absorb. The sheer scale of this system was its key to success. A larger gut can hold more food for a longer time, allowing for more efficient digestion of low-quality forage. This is why the largest land herbivores today, like elephants, are hindgut fermenters. Sauropods took this principle to its absolute extreme. For a long time, it was also believed that sauropods aided this digestive process by swallowing stones, known as gastroliths. The theory was that these stones would be held in a muscular gizzard, where they would grind against each other, pulverizing the unchewed food. While some dinosaur fossils have been found with polished stones in their stomach cavities, providing direct evidence for this behavior, the role of gastroliths in sauropod digestion is now debated. Many paleontologists believe that the chemical breakdown in their enormous fermentation vats would have been more than sufficient, and the gastroliths may have served other purposes such as mineral supplementation. The end result of this highly specialized no-Q feeding strategy and massive fermentation gut was a constant. It was like having a slow-burning, highly efficient furnace at the core of its body. This steady energy release was the perfect fuel for their continuous, explosive growth. They were not just eating to live, they were eating to build. We have now assembled the core components of the sauropod growth machine: a warm-blooded high-performance engine, supercharged and air-conditioned by a bird-like respiratory system, and fueled by a non-stop high-throughput digestive factory. But there is one final piece to this puzzle. To grow at such a phenomenal rate, a sauropod needed not just energy, but a constant supply of specific raw materials, particularly calcium and phosphate, to build its colossal skeleton. The final stage of our investigation will explore how their very life cycle and behavior were optimized to acquire these essential building blocks of a giant. We have constructed the sauropod as a magnificent biological machine. It's an integrated system of breathtaking efficiency designed for a single, overwhelming purpose: rapid, relentless growth. We have seen how its warm-blooded, bird-like physiology provided the metabolic engine, and how its unique feeding and digestive strategy provided the constant high-volume fuel. But growth is not just about energy, it is about raw materials. To build a skeleton that would eventually weigh tens of tons, a growing sauropod needed a constant, massive, and reliable supply of specific minerals, most critically, calcium and phosphate. The final piece of the puzzle, the secret that completes the story of their incredible growth, lies in their reproductive strategy and life cycle, a strategy that appears to have been perfectly optimized for resource acquisition. The journey begins, once again, with the egg. As we have learned, sauropod eggs were laid in large clutches, often numbering 20 to 30 eggs or more. The females would migrate to specific communal nesting grounds, vast sandy floodplains where they would dig shallow nests and deposit their clutches. This quantity over quality strategy, known as R selection, is common in animals where the survival rate of the young is very low. By producing a large number of offspring, the parents are playing a numbers game, betting that a few will survive the perilous journey to adulthood. This strategy, however, had a profound and direct impact on the initial growth of the hatchlings. The calcium required to form the hard shells of those 24 eggs had to come from the mother, unlike the Tyrannosaurus rex that could store and mobilize calcium from its own bones via medullary tissue. The sheer quantity of shell material required by a sauropod likely demanded that they lay their eggs in environments that were already rich in calcium. This is supported by the geology of many sauropod nesting sites, which are often found in carbonate-rich soils. The mother was not just choosing a safe place for her eggs, she was choosing a place that could help her build them. Once hatched, the tiny 15-pound sauropodlets were, as we've established, likely on their own. They were precocial, ready to move and feed from day one. But they were also incredibly vulnerable. Their solution was to avoid the adult world altogether. Instead of joining the colossal adults on the open plains, where they would be easy targets for predators and at risk of being trampled, the hatchlings likely congregated in the dense, forested areas of the ecosystem. These forests would have provided crucial cover from predators, a safe haven where they could begin their explosive growth in relative security. This separation of church and state between juveniles and adults, known as niche partitioning, was a brilliant survival strategy, but it also served a critical physiological purpose. The young, rapidly growing sauropods had different dietary needs than the adults. While the adults were bulk feeding on tough woody conifers, the juveniles needed a diet that was richer and high quality, easily digestible protein and minerals to fuel their phenomenal growth rate. The forested understory would have been a perfect nursery, providing a bounty of soft, fast-growing ferns, cycads, and horsetails plants that were not only easier to digest, but also richer in the essential nutrients, including the calcium and phosphate needed to build their rapidly expanding skeletons for the first few years of their lives. These young sauropods were inhabitants of a different world, a secret shaded world of rapid growth and constant foraging. The pressure to grow was immense. Every pound gained was another step away from vulnerability. We can imagine them as tireless eating machines, their simple heads constantly raking in food, their high-octane metabolisms working overtime to convert this nutrient-rich forage into bone and muscle. As they grew larger, reaching the size of a rhinoceros and then an elephant, they would gradually move out from the protective cover of the forests and begin to join the adult herds on the more open floodplains. Their diet would shift towards the tougher, more abundant but lower-quality vegetation that the adults consumed. By this point, their colossal fermentation vat guts were large enough to efficiently extract the necessary energy from this food source. They had graduated from the nursery and entered the world of the giants. The entire life cycle of the sauropod was a perfectly choreographed symphony of growth. It began with a reproductive strategy that maximized the number of offspring. It continued with a juvenile phase spent in a specific, nutrient-rich environment that was perfectly tailored to the demands of explosive growth. And it culminated in an adult life as a colossal, low-energy-expenditure browser, a living mountain that had won the race against predation. So, how did they get so big, so fast? The answer is a stunning example of evolutionary convergence. A suite of interconnected adaptations that all worked in concert to solve this single immense biological challenge. They had a high, warm-blooded metabolism, the internal engine that ran hot and fast, enabling the cellular processes of rapid growth. They had a hyperefficient, bird-like respiratory system, which supercharged their bodies with oxygen and, crucially, served as a whole-body cooling system to prevent them from overheating. They had a highly specialized feeding strategy, using their long necks and simple teeth to harvest vast quantities of food with minimal energy expenditure. They possessed a colossal digestive system, a fermentation vat that could efficiently extract a constant stream of energy from tough, unchewed plant matter. And they had an optimized life cycle, where the young grew up in separate, nutrient-rich environments that provided the specific raw materials needed to build their giant bodies. No single one of these traits could have created a sauropod. It was the seamless integration of all of them that made the impossible possible. The sauropods were not just big. They were paragons of biological efficiency. They were the ultimate growth machines, a testament to the power of evolution to push the boundaries of what is possible for life on land. Their story is a reminder that in the grand history of our planet, the true measure of success is not just in being big, but in the brilliant, complex, and incredibly fast journey it took to get there.